you might want to be presenting different sides to yourself, different dimensions, and so you might have two different versions that kind of highlight different aspects of your background or show different skills or different elements that way. So it's okay to have more than one version. When I mention that to students, it's a very freeing experience because they're trying to make one document work for all employers. So that is often a way to go if you have lots of interests. So let me offer you a couple more tips about the resume. To vary your verbs, use proper tense. Also make sure if you have lists that they're parallel. So when I mean proper tense, any job you're currently holding is present tense, everything else is past tense. And that should be consistent. If you have a list, just make sure the lists are parallel and the syntax and grammar makes sense. Try to avoid phrases like assisted, which tells us absolutely nothing about you and what you did. It tells us what the other person did. So you want to use words that are a bit more descriptive. Pay attention, if you have more than one page to your resume, you don't want to have a page break in the middle of a blurb. So they go together. The heading and the text is one unit, and so you don't want to split that in the middle. After you've worked hard on your resume, and I've looked at it, and you've looked at it, and your friends have looked at it, and everyone's looked at it, and it's perfect. This is it. Aha, my final resume. Convert it to a PDF before submitting it to employers. Because just if the formatting gets all weird or you don't know, they may be, a lot of law firms still use WordPerfect, and if you're using Word, or there can be translation issues. So we recommend converting everything to a PDF. Okay, I'm going to move on to cover letters unless there are other resume questions. Okay, so cover letters. Yes?
I have a resume question.
Yes, Bailey.
Should you send in a resume that is titled resume in a file so that you can recognize it on your computer?
Great, thank you. So when you are saving your documents on your computer, come up with some very logical names. So I recommend using your last name. So maybe you do Aronowitz resume. So that, first of all, you know it's your resume, but also the employer knows if they've saved all these PDFs on their computer and now they're trying to sort through, they know it's your name and it's your resume as opposed to any other documents. So if you're saving the cover letter, you might put your name in it and cover letter, or you might do, Aronowitz district attorney cover letter, so that you know on your computer, so when you're uploading documents, you upload the right letter. We'll talk about that. Sometimes students upload the wrong letter. So be very careful with those naming conventions, because it's as much to help you stay organized as it is for the employer. Okay, so cover letter. So as I mentioned, they have a different job to do than a resume. The cover letter is really identifying the position you're looking for. Many of these employers are hiring multiple positions, or they're looking for summer interns and fall interns all at the same time. So it's helpful for them to just know kind of which pile to put you in. This is really where you can explain yourself, explain your background, your qualifications. This is an opportunity to interpret your prior experience. They might look at your background and not really understand how it's relevant to the work that they do. And so here's that chance to really speak directly to the employer about your background. This is also your first writing sample. Right? They're not going to go and read that 8-page writing and research memo if they don't like what they see in a 1-page letter. So you've got to get this right and have it be an effective piece of writing. And this is really where you're going to talk about your passion and your enthusiasm for the work that the employer does and the work that they would be asking you to do. Now, I'm going to say never, and I mean never send a resume without a cover letter, except if they explicitly say, do not send us a cover letter. Or sometimes you're applying for a position that is a very complicated application or with essays, and that might take the place of a cover letter. A lot of employers will not ask for a cover letter, but you should send it anyway, because you don't want to relinquish the opportunity to communicate all of this information. So you should always introduce your letter, or introduce your resume with a cover letter. So here again, some do's and don'ts. We'll start with the do's. Here again, 1 page. If you're applying for a fellowship after law school, where it's a very lengthy process, at that point we'll talk about a longer document. But for what most of you are applying for right now, 1 page is sufficient. everything should match up with your resume. So, you know, that at the top of the resume where you have your contact information, I call it the letterhead. So just like a law firm has a letterhead, or Golden Gate, we have a letterhead, you know, always on the page with our contact information. You should treat this like your letterhead and use it for all of your correspondence. So all your job application documents, if you're sending a thank you letter to the employer, just use that same thing and make sure everything matches up. So it's part of creating your own brand. So use the same font, the same formatting throughout all your documents. Each letter should be tailored to the employer. In a perfect world, it would be written from scratch just for that employer. Sometimes that's not realistic. But what you want is to think about the reader's perspective. And if they, when they read it, if they feel like it was written directly for them, I think that's a pretty good goal. Okay? This is where you're going to highlight your background and proofread. You'll see some examples of that. Spell check just doesn't catch everything. So you really, you know, it's not going to catch a missing word, or you use the wrong version of there, or, you know, it just, you really need to be careful about that. Some don'ts: do not use a generic letter. They can tell, they can smell it for miles around, and for every generic letter they get from a student, there will be another application from a different student who is pouring out their heart and soul about how they've wanted to do this job since they were 3 years old. So, you always need to address your letter to a human, an actual human being. So do not use dear sir or madam, or to whom it may concern. Typically, if there's a job fair or you're applying to something in LCS Online, we almost always have an actual human being's name. So that's a good place to start. If for some reason there is no name attached to the application, you can contact us. Maybe we know that organization and we know who makes hiring decisions, and we can give you, oh, well, you should address it to this person. You can call that office and say, who handles, you know, law student internships, you know, to whom should I address my application? That seems to freak most students out. What if they know it was me calling? Well, great, now you look like you care about details. So it can only help you to get it right. So call the organization, you know, talk to students who have worked there. I mean, but certainly if you can't find it, come talk to us. We have some ideas for how you might find it. If after all of your due diligence, we've tried everything we can think of and we cannot get a human's name, then there are probably better phrases than these. You know, it might be dear hiring attorney, it could be dear recruiting coordinator, but those are very organization specific. So again, you might consult with us at LCS, because if it's at a big firm, it might be a recruiting coordinator. If it's at a small firm, it might be something else. So we'll help you figure out at least the right generic phrase, so it sounds right. Okay, do not rehash your resume in your letter. You might refer to information there, but what I mean by this is you don't want to like just have your cover letter just be a chronological recitation of your background, right? So you say, well, before law school I worked here, and then I worked there, and I worked there, because that's what your resume says. So we're going to talk about how do you make it sound different and interesting. Try to avoid sentences that are purely about the organization or about like law and justice generally. Those tend to fall very flat. So you might say, your law firm is the leading plaintiffs firm in all of the Bay Area. You know, something that you've just pasted from their website. They know those things. They put it on their website. Now, if there's something about that that you find appealing, that you've always wanted to work for a large plaintiffs firm and why, you might mention that, but there you're drawing a connection between you and the firm. You don't want to just gratuitously tell them about themselves. You also want to avoid the, you know, I went to law school because the pursuit of justice is a noble pursuit and all individuals should have, you know, the sort of flowery sentences that you might have put in your law school essay. Don't put them here. And don't use really complicated language. I'm sure you're talking about this in writing and research. It should just be very straightforward writing. If you would never say that word, don't put it in here. So we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to actually show you first a job announcement and then show you a law student's attempt to answer this job announcement. And we'll kind of take it through stages so that you can see how to build a more effective letter for yourself. So again, pay attention to your initial impressions. You know, if you were this employer, are you getting what you need from the student's cover letter? So if you look at the bottom, this tells you what the job is, and it says draft demand, so this is what was in the announcement, draft demand letters, draft discovery, legal research, pretrial prep, client contact, filing, telephones, draft briefs for employment law, civil litigation practice. Looking for someone who likes the idea of working in a small firm. Okay, so now pretend you are this employer who has crafted this, and here's the application you get. Can you all see that?
Tired.
This is a rock star. Okay, so a couple things. The letterhead issues. We're just going to start at the top. You know, this is kind of the old school when you were typing a letter on a typewriter, which I'm looking around the room, most of you were not around in those days. I was, but you don't do this anymore. So use your letterhead. Put your name at the top with your address and phone number and email address. All of that goes on the top. You want to be careful not to be sloppy. So even the way apartment is presented here, where it's lowercase and it's an abbreviation, but there's no period. Employers hate that stuff. So you have to get it right. Make it look polished. Don't make it look like you've cut corners. In the internal address, it doesn't list the name of the organization. So if you're writing to someone who works in a big, tall building, let's pretend 111 Market Street actually exists, and it's a big, tall building, and the mail gets delivered, they don't even know what law firm to deliver it to. So you need to make sure after the person's name, you put the organization's name, their mailing address. Now you might notice, look at the way Johnson is spelled here, the way Johnson is spelled there. Do you think Mary Johnson would notice that discrepancy? Yes. So again, you got to get it right. Small details, but they're very important details. In the greeting, the more standard way would be either Dear Ms. MS period Johnson or Dear Mr. Johnson. That's it. It's either Mr. or Ms., the last name, and a colon. The letter, does this, what have you learned about the student and their passions and credentials? Nothing, right? It's putting all the work on the employer. Like, as you can see, well, no. You want to make it as easy as possible for the employer to figure out you're the person you want to talk to. So you need to kind of analyze your background and digest it for them. The email address is also an issue. A couple issues. I don't recommend embedding your phone number or your email in the text of the letter. If it's on the top of the page, it's really easy for them to find. And then you need to come up with something that's a little bit more appropriate than wanted or whatever your hobby is. So, get a free Gmail account that's just for your job applications if you don't want to give up your other fun, quirky email name. But it has to be something that is appropriate. It also should be something that easily identifies you. There was a student here several years ago who had just kind of this funny, like, oak tree at AOL or whatever it was. Like, I didn't know who was sending me emails, and it wouldn't insert her name in when I'm looking at my inbox. So who is this person writing to me? So you want to have an email address that makes it obvious who you are. If they have to search through their inbox to find you, your email address is very professional and obvious. So simple stuff, okay? So let's pretend we sent this student away and came back with all of your advice. And so we see, okay, they at least have a letterhead, it's much more presentable, they have a better email address, got the internal address, the formatting looks better. And just without reading it, do you have more confidence in this person or the prior person? This one, right? So form matters, right? You're not going to read that other one. But take a look at the text and see what you think. Can you see this in the back? Because I can read it.
You spelled position wrong.
Thank you. So that's always like the winner of the prize there. Yeah. So this is where, again, spell check is not your friend. So if you look in the second paragraph, I'm seeking a positron. That's a word. Spell check didn't catch it. So you just really need to be physics. I'm not a physics person. So this letter does, when I talked about don't rehash your resume, this is what I mean. Don't do that, because there's all this random stuff, and so great, you have a sense of what that person did, but you don't really know